All right, here we go with the second part of this question of what is it that we should say. And by the way, I should say the mouse video doesn't really have a ton of relevance. I just always think it's hilarious, and I wanted to get my boy's reaction. Um, so let's go back to this question that hopefully you thought about. What box on the canvas are um, advertisers communicating? The problem, the solution, unique value proposition, unfair advantage, customer segments, revenue streams. Like, what are they talking about in their ads by and large? So let's look at a couple of examples. So this is a Rolex ad. It says, "Live for greatness, Ed Viesturs." And Ed Viesturs happens to be one of my favorite mountaineers. Gone up all 14 8,000 meter peaks without supplemental oxygen. And he says, climbing also comes with responsibility. Getting to the top is optional. Getting down mandatory. So he's been a bold climber, but a safe climber, which is, or at least as safe as you can be when you're climbing K2 and Annapurna and Everest and all these kinds of climbs without oxygen. But if we think about this ad, there's not really a whole lot about the solution. It's not, Rolex, it functions better than other watches. It keeps the time. What they're really communicating here is live for greatness. You're not ready. You're young. You haven't been with the company all that long. You're not quite sure of your position. Maybe in a few years when you're a little more established, but not yet. Of course, if you disagree, you can visit an official Rolex jeweler. Again, think about what they're communicating here. It's not that, this is the prettiest, sparkliest watch, although it might be. They're really talking about the value that they're trying to create for the customer. The 1947, the sound barrier is broken. Rolex for life's defining moments. It's again not talking about product features per se, not talking about the solution per se. They're communicating to the customer, but they're not even really saying, here's the characteristics of a particular customer. Again, they're communicating the value proposition. So let's look. So I guess that's the first takeaway. When good marketers communicate, they're usually communicating about the value proposition. Nobody cares about your solution. People only care about the value that gets created because of your solution. So let's look back at an example. It's a little bit sad. It's kind of a bad example in many ways. But it makes for an interesting story around the importance of communicating the value proposition. So if we go back in time, if we go back to the 1950s, pollution wasn't on most people's minds. In fact, I'll just show you a really funny picture real quick as this is, sorry, not the slickest video production, but disposable life. If I could spell disposable. Let's see. No, that's not what I want. National Geographic. Plastic. That's the image I'm looking for. So this here, we made plastic. We depend on it. Now we're drowning in it. This was actually on the cover of, I think, I forget if it was a Life magazine or a National Geographic, but this was sort of the mentality in the 1950s. This idea that, hey, isn't life easy? We can just do everything with plastic and we just throw it away when we're done. No big deal, right? And so, it started to get pretty bad in the 50s and 60s, and at some point the Cuyahoga River here in Ohio caught on fire. It was that polluted. It actually caught on fire a couple of times. And people started to wake up and say, wait a second, maybe our actions do have consequences on the environment. Maybe we should do something about it. Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring, and she talks about, it's sort of one of the founding moments of the environmental movement. And if you fast forward a bit to the 1980s and early 90s, there starts to be more and more interest in keeping our environment clean. And so, by the time you go to the let's say late 80s, and I'm a little kid in school, in elementary school, and I was convinced that every time you threw away, the plastic rings on like a six pack of soda, and you pull them off, I was sure if you threw that away, for sure what would happen is it would land on a dolphin's beak and it would kill the dolphin because the dolphin would starve to death, right? Or it would strangle a seagull or something. So, I got shown all these videos in school about saving energy and reducing our environmental footprint. It was kind of this big movement, and there were even in a number of states there was legislation to ban plastic packaging, ban plastic bags, and so this big groundswell of environmentalism. Well, you can imagine that if you're the plastic companies, you start to get nervous. And so they said, and I wasn't there, I don't know exactly how this happened, but here's how I like to imagine it. So you get a bunch of old dudes, right, surrounding this table. They're all wearing like three-piece tuxedos with like monocles, and they've got their cigars, and there's a single light coming down, and they're sitting around this oak table, and they're saying, what are we going to do about this environmentalism stuff? And it's like Mr. Burns, and it's Rockefeller, and it's I don't know, your stereotypical evil corporate geniuses, right? And what they decide to do, and this part really happened, they decided to launch a marketing campaign. They decided they would try to change public opinion, and they would go straight to the public to make their case about how great plastics really are and why we shouldn't ban them or reduce their use. So their first commercial, well, I don't know if it was their first, but here's an example of a commercial that came out in 1992. Let's take a look at this, and I'll pull it up here.
When you look at plastic, you know how it helps things stay fresh and safe and light and unbreakable and strong and easy to carry. But take another look. Plastic also saves energy because it helps make cars lighter to save gas. And plastic insulation helps save energy at home. Even these strong plastic bags help save energy because they take less energy to make than other grocery bags. To learn more, call this number for a free booklet. And take another look at plastic.
Thanks, 90s Mom.